everyone, and welcome to the New Moon Bitcoin forecast. This is going to be the 2 weeks that start with the waxing moon cycle at the New Moon in Libra, and it'll take us through to kind of mid to late October when we move to the Aries full moon. So an interesting time, generally speaking, from an astrological point of view. A lot of the outer planets will be going direct this month, and as I said in my forecast last month, I fully expect that this will mean that things are going to really pick up in the outer world. We're going to see a lot more progress being made with things like US legislation. At the moment there's a lot of uncertainty around the debt limit crisis, about the infrastructure package, and there will be quite a lot of information coming out in the next week or two, such as CPI data, jobs data, and that kind of thing. And I think that will bring a lot of clarity and confidence to the market, and it should help to kind of get things going again. People may feel more confident about taking a risk and sort of investing. And then if we think about October in relation to the Bitcoin cycle, and we think back to October 2020, this was really the month where Bitcoin took off. So if we have a look at the Bitcoin chart, we can see that during 2020, aside from that crash that happened in March along with the stock market due to COVID, Bitcoin was pretty much trading sideways. And then we got to the autumn and around about September, October, and you can see suddenly there's this kind of upward movement where we move from around about $10,000 or $11,000 right up to around about kind of 19 or so by the mid-November. So I think we're probably going to see something similar again as we move into the tail end of the bull cycle. Now, this was the start of the sort of the bull cycle for 2020, and yes, but I will be getting into my long-term trends and forecasts when we get closer to the November lunar eclipse, because of course it's the second eclipse season for 2020 2021, and for me, things move in kind of 3 to 6 month cycles as a result. So I will be getting into that in due course, but in the meantime, let's get back to the current 2-week cycle. So yes. So, as I say, a lot of the outer planets are going direct. The first planet to go direct will be Pluto, which will be today, so the day of the full moon. And of course, Pluto is very important in the Bitcoin chart at the moment because we're kind of oscillating between the energy of Jupiter on one hand, which is very expansive and it's very bullish, and then Pluto on the other hand, that is slightly more controlling, manipulative, and perhaps doesn't necessarily want the price to go up for various nefarious reasons. We could be talking here about various political institutions or people who want to introduce their own form of currency, that kind of thing. Pluto is very much associated with plutocracies, with power, especially hidden power. So there has been this oscillation over the last month or two between these two planets. But now, as I said, Pluto is going to be going direct, and on top of that, Jupiter will also be going direct. So Jupiter will go direct on around about the 18th of October, so as we get closer to the full moon, and Pluto on the 6th, and then Saturn, which is kind of in the middle, Saturn here also in Aquarius. Saturn will be going direct on the 11th of October, so sometimes, I think Monday, yes, Monday. So this is, I think, really going to make us see the energy pick up and be expressed in the outer world as opposed to in the internal world or behind the scenes. And so I do expect there to be a lot more momentum. In fact, I've called my new moon forecast for the next 2 weeks pedal to the metal. I think we really can expect the pace and the momentum to pick up, and I think it's important to pace ourselves, certainly, because I think things are going to get quite busy. I mean, they generally do going into the autumn anyway, but this is just something to be aware of. And then in terms of transits, if we look at the new moon itself, this one is also very high octane. We've got the sun and the moon in Libra at 13 degrees in the 3rd house. So this is to do with things like announcements, exchanges, any form of toing and froing. So of course we could also be talking here about the recent development with Strike and Bitcoin and the Lightning Network on Twitter. That there's a way to actually make payments across a network, a communications network, because Mars plays strongly into this new moon. It's also at 13 degrees of Libra, and Mars tends to accelerate, so it tends to speed up, it tends to accelerate, it tends to really introduce us a degree of confidence, sometimes risk, although Mars in Libra is not really overly keen on risk, I must be honest. It tends to want kind of balance, and it's also very much about driving things forward, forward momentum. So I think this is a really good development for Bitcoin. I think we're going to start to see, that this kind of have a ripple effect, if you like, outwards, because Mars rules, don't forget that Mars rules the Bitcoin midheaven here in Aries. So I think overall it's kind of showing the way for Bitcoin as a potential currency, because that's always been a question mark hanging over Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin a currency? Is it something that we can use for payments, or is it actually a kind of a store of value in the sense of gold? It's something that it's like a safe haven asset that you sort of put your money into, like property, and you don't necessarily touch. You just allow it to kind of appreciate over time, and that's almost a hedge against things like inflation or the volatility in other assets. So yes, I think that's kind of interesting. Now, I should say that we do have this grand cross sort of here forming between the Sun, the Moon, and Mars, and then the Earth on one side. The Bitcoin Sun here in the sixth house, and also Chiron in Aries in the ninth house. And I think possibly what this points to is a certain tension, because it does kind of raise questions. Up till now we've kind of got away almost with this notion that Bitcoin isn't a currency, and therefore it doesn't compete, or it won't compete with other currencies that are potentially coming online, such as the digital dai. There's now talk about a digital dollar, and so on. So it hasn't really sort of rattled central banks much, but I think that now that we can actually see the sort of viability of being able to make payments without a third party, in between, without using banks, without using kind of payment networks or kind of wire systems, that kind of thing. I think that has the potential to rattle the powers that be, and I think it could cause first of all, a little bit of tension around this topic. And I think secondly, it does potentially make Bitcoin a little bit vulnerable. I think that's why we've got Chiron here in the ninth house. It does potentially make Bitcoin vulnerable to attack from, as I say, powers that be who are not keen on, who have a kind of competing philosophy, or who want their currency to sort of be king, if you like. So it does almost bring about a kind of clash of philosophies of kind of, if you did have Bitcoin as an alternative currency, you didn't necessarily have to use fiat currency, and that I think is potentially very threatening to the institutions and to the status quo. So I think there's a real question here around the philosophy of Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin is seen, how it's defined, not only by those that use it, but also those who may be antagonists, if you like, or critics. So I think there's a real need to kind of iron out what exactly the philosophy of Bitcoin is, and I think some steps have been taken in the last few months to do that, but I think it's an ongoing project. I quite liked Anthony Pompliano's interview that he did recently on this topic, and I think there's a need to, perhaps when we are certainly evangelizing to newcomers and so on, for everyone to be singing from the same hymn sheet, so that we all kind of know what is Bitcoin, what is its kind of potential, what can it do. And I think because that's how you kind of get people to buy in. That's certainly how I kind of bought in, was seeing from my own experience and from other people's experience of what fiat currency had done to disempower me and my family, and other people around me, and kind of kept them stuck, and was looking for an alternative. So I think it is very important that we get that discussion right, and I think that's why we've got this third ninth house sort of tension here. And then again with Bitcoin, the Bitcoin sun in the 6th house, this to me points to, well, what is, again, it's about defining Bitcoin, because the sun rules the Bitcoin chart. It's the ruler of the rising sign Leo, which is all about identity, and it's in the 6th house, which is the house of health, but also the house of work. And I think it's the sense of like, well, how exactly does Bitcoin work? How are we going to use it? Is it just something that you kind of buy and store, or is it something that you can actually use to kind of pay for things? And so I think there's probably going to be a lot of discussion around this topic, not necessarily only over the next 2 weeks, but I think it's certainly something that needs to be kind of raised, particularly, as I say, as we're getting more critiques and more noise coming from authorities like the US, the SEC and so on, that wants to regulate it. Again, if you want to regulate something, you have to know what you're regulating. What is it? You have to understand what it is at base in order to apply certain rules to it. So I think, that is going to become more and more important as we get, into October. And certainly, as we get closer to things like clarity around the US economy, all these things kind of tie in, because I think there was some clause tied into the infrastructure package, or one of those bills that affected Bitcoin. So that's on the slightly kind of negative, but I think on the positive, as I say, we do have Mars kind of champing at the bit to get going, and we also have Mercury nearby. So Mercury is currently retrograde in Libra, but it's moving back towards Mars, and that Sun and the Moon here in the 3rd house. It's traveling in a clockwise direction. So it's going to get closer and closer to that Mars, and yes, you can see at the moment it's actually making a really lovely trine here to the Bitcoin Chiron and to the Bitcoin Neptune, which I think will help to kind of soften that difficult energy that we've had certainly in September. Towards the end of September, that Pisces new moon, waning moon cycle was like treacle. There was so much confusion, there was so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Things just felt kind of like like we were walking through mud or treacle. We couldn't see clearly, no wood for the trees, and it was difficult to make decisions and so on. And I think that's why we had delays to, the infrastructure bill and that kind of thing. But, Neptune rules the 8th house, Bitcoin's 8th house, and it also rules the 9th house. So again, I think hopefully this Mercury will, by going back to sort of review things, because Mercury retrograde is all about reviewing. You add in the fact that it's in Libra, which is about discussions, so balanced discussions, weighing things up. So by going back over things, it might become a little bit clearer as to exactly, what Bitcoin is, and how to sort of approach it from a kind of legal perspective, because again, Libra is about, the laws and sort of legalities. And that this might kind of cut Bitcoin some slack, because the thing is that Mercury at this point is also trying to transiting Jupiter, which is sitting on that Neptune. So this, I think, is going to ameliorate any of the difficult geopolitical environment and conditions that we had in September, particularly with that Evergrande sort of property crisis potential kind of looming over everybody in September. Everyone was, I think, a little bit concerned that there would be a contagion effect onto the rest of the markets, and of course that hasn't really happened. I didn't think that it would, but you never know for certain. And but I think it's now becoming clear that that China can't really necessarily afford for Evergrande to fail in a spectacular fashion, not least because it would affect the local market. And even though they banned Bitcoin, I think it had more to do with the fact that they didn't want people to transfer assets out of China, to, sort of offshore, that were related to Evergrande or to property investments, that kind of thing. So, I think that it was more about damage control internally as opposed to, externally. I don't think it was really an attack on Bitcoin. I'm sure they'll kind of they'll relax a little bit once they've introduced their digital die and they have averted any potential kind of property crisis, which has been looming since 2015. We had a similar thing back then. I think it was called Black Thursday, which I wrote about on my Astroinsights blog at the time, and a very similar thing happened. You had a kind of a crash in China, and then everyone was terrified about what this could mean for the wider economy, the sort of global economy, because of the amount of debt that is in the Chinese system, particularly with shadow banking and informal lenders, that kind of thing. But again, it didn't really amount to much, and I don't think that it's amounted to much again. It's been a bit of a what do they call it? A whimper rather than a bang. So yes, I think that Jupiter really is sitting here on the Bitcoin Neptune, I think is really starting to alleviate people's fears about the robustness of Bitcoin, despite market fluctuations, like what happened with Evergrande in China, despite what's happening in America with the infrastructure bill, that Bitcoin has been robust. It might have crashed in May, but it kind of came back. It's reached the $50,000 mark several times since then, and I think people are starting to be reassured that it's not about to crash, that all those fears that we had, particularly, as I say, towards the end of September, Neptune really can play mind games with you. It can really sort of like amplify your worst fears, particularly of the unknown, even though there may be nothing in the external world to really validate that. It just has that effect, and I think Jupiter here is really helping to alleviate that and to restore confidence to the market. So yes, I think another positive factor in Bitcoin's favor, and then Venus continues to transit through the 5th house, which is again great for speculation. It definitely increases price, it increases buoyancy, it increases that sense of kind of optimism amongst investors. So I think that's going to return slowly to the market, particularly, as I say, once things become clearer in the States. And if you can see here that Venus is making a lovely sextile to the Bitcoin Jupiter, which again is very buoyant, very bullish, speaks to the health of Bitcoin. So I do think the futures market's going to look quite buoyant, in the next couple of weeks. And then the other thing is, of course, Uranus. So Uranus is still retrograde, and it will be the last of the planets to actually turn direct. So it won't turn direct during this 2-week period, but it is making some positive aspects to, first of all, the Bitcoin Sun, which is again extremely positive because this rules investors. It rules the 7th house. So it's all the significant parties who have relationships with Bitcoin, both friends and enemies, but it tends to be kind of friends, and so I think that bodes extremely well for Bitcoin, again, I don't see any sort of blow off top. We might be, I think we're moving into the first wave essentially of that kind of upward swing. Jordan Lindsay actually did a really good video recently. I must recommend it. I'm going to put a link in the description box, where he outlined where he saw these 3 waves kind of taking place, and I feel that kind of is very much in alignment with what I'm thinking and what the astrology is sort of suggesting. I haven't yet done my long-term forecast, but I will do that shortly for the upcoming November lunar eclipse that's happening on the 19th. So I'm going to be looking at the next 3 months as far as Bitcoin's concerned. So do look out for that. I just haven't had a chance to do it yet. But yes, I think just in terms of the new moon, the new moons are about fresh starts, pressing the reset button. We add in that Mars, which is all about go, go, go. We add in Mercury, which is about reviewing, revisioning, going back to have another look at things. Its positive aspects to Jupiter and to the Bitcoin Neptune, and I think we're going to start to see things easing up when it comes to regulation and speaking of trying to kind of tax Bitcoin or that kind of thing. I don't think it's going to be as easy as people think. So I think they're going to have to go back to the drawing board, which I think, jives quite nicely with Mercury being retrograde when it comes to, regulation, that kind of thing. So I think we'll see a kind of a people walking backwards a little bit and realizing that it's not going to be that straightforward. It's, it's going to take a little bit of time to actually work through these issues. And then, as I say, this issue around defining Bitcoin, I think that's going to be important for the Bitcoin community to kind of work together to sort of get that right, to kind of have almost a policy document, maybe updating what Satoshi, wrote originally with that white paper. And people have been working on that, consistently. If you think about the work that ARK Investment's been doing. So I think there's a need to step that up again, since those discussions that were had back in July. I think it's time to take up that debate again, and I think it will be very fruitful, if it's done during this 2-week period. So yes, I think that's all I really want to kind of say at this point. I hope that it's been helpful. I know it sounds a little bit vague, but I just think, I don't really want to kind of say anything unless I feel strongly about it. Needless to say, I feel we're in an upward trend. Things are on the move, and brace yourself is all I can say as we move into November and December. So yes, have a great 2 weeks, and all the best. Happy trading, and I'll see you again in a fortnight.